Blood vessels are tubes, and like all tubular structures, they exhibit the basic pattern of a tube. Recall that the basic anatomy of a tube is a wall comprised of three structural layers or tunics. From inside out, there is an internal layer typically comprised of epithelial tissue and associated connective tissue, a middle layer that consists of variable combinations of smooth muscle and some type of connective tissue, and an external layer typically consisting of a variably thick, dense, irregular, fibroelastic connective tissue. All tubes in the body follow this basic pattern, which we will now apply to the anatomy of blood vessels. Let's begin by examining the basic structure of a blood vessel, both with an illustration and with an actual photomicrograph, and demonstrate the basic three-layered pattern observed in tubular anatomy. The internal layer of the blood vessel is named the tunica intima or tunica interna. The name interna is obvious, while intima, which is probably a less familiar term to most, is also a good name. It is Latin meaning the inmost, or as I like to think, the layer that is intimate with the blood inside the vessel. The tunica intima consists of two tissues. The innermost of the two tissues is a simple squamous epithelial layer called endothelium. This thin layer of epithelium lines the entire cardiovascular system. That is, it is the tissue that the blood is in contact with as it moves through the heart and all the blood vessels. Moving outward from the endothelium is a more variable layer in blood vessels, the thin perforated network of elastic connective tissue called the internal elastic membrane. This layer is typically thrown into wave-like folds as a result of muscle contraction in the vessel wall. Together, these two components form the extremely thin internal layer or tunica intima of the blood vessel. The middle layer of a blood vessel, logically named the tunica media, is typically the thickest part of the vessel wall and can have three subdivisions. The proportions and arrangements of the different tissue subdivisions in this layer are largely responsible for the functional features of the vessel. Let's look at each of the subdivisions of the tunica media. A key component of this layer is smooth muscle tissue. This can occur in different relative amounts in a blood vessel and is responsible for the vessel's ability to regulate its diameter. Interwoven among the muscle cells is a variable network of elastic fibers. When this is a dominant part of the layer, the rings of elastic tissue are referred to as the elastic lamellae. The outer boundary of the tunica media is another perforated wave-like elastic sheet, the external elastic membrane. It is not always present and is typically less well developed than the internal elastic membrane. The third layer of the blood vessel is the outer layer, referred to as the tunica externa or tunica adventitia. This layer can vary from a thin to a relatively thick layer of dense, irregular fibroelastic connective tissue. It functions to reinforce the vessel wall and also introduces blood supply to the tissues of the vessel. This is a concept that many people never think about, but blood vessels are tissues, and like all tissues, their cells need a nutrient supply. The small blood vessels that carry blood to the tissues of a blood vessel are the vasa vasorum, meaning the vessels to the vessel. You can easily see them as the web-like network of small vessels on the tunica externa of the aorta and its large branches pictured here. This, then, is the basic structure of a blood vessel, a three-layered tube comprised of an internal layer named the tunica intima or interna, a middle layer, the tunica media, and an external layer called the tunica externa or adventitia. However, if you have any familiarity with blood vessels, you know that there are many different types. There are vessels named arteries, and within this family of vessels there are elastic arteries, muscular arteries, and arterioles. Then there are vessels named veins, which are subdivided into veins and venules. Finally, there are very small blood vessels called capillaries. So why all the different named vessels, and how do they relate to the basic pattern? To learn more, watch the movies on arteries, veins, and capillaries, where I will teach you how modifications of this basic pattern account for the various types of blood vessels and why this is important.